Police removed boxes and boxes of body parts, evidence of what appears to be a psychopathic mass murder.
So what have you been doing lately? Working and working and working and working?
Working next week, starting Monday. I go back to work Sunday nights.
Dismembered human remains, decapitated heads in a refrigerator freezer, limbs and male genitals in other containers.
I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, mother. I hate you. This is out of control.
Throughout the trial that found him sane, grief-stricken families of the 15 men and boys Dahmer killed and mutilated held their peace.
I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself.
Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal, killed 17 men and traumatized the whole nation. He drugged, dismembered, and even cannibalized some of his victims. But what happened? We will go through different chapters. I will slowly introduce you to forensic astrology, how I see these events, how I would analyze his behavior, and where I can locate these patterns in his chart. So you don't need to be a pro in astrology to follow my thinking, because I will try to make it understandable. This video is a bit long, but I'm hoping that you're into it. So grab your snacks, lean back, and enjoy the show. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. It would mean the world to me. I'm working with forensic astrology, which is medical astrology and the degree theory combined. Astrology is not how you're going to turn out, or this is how you have to behave. It's about important checkpoints, lessons, if you will, which you've decided to take on. I can totally understand if you're not into spiritual stuff or true crime cases, but please be respectful about it. No need to hate or to be unpolite. This is just for your entertainment. And with that, let's begin. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on the 21st of May 1960 in West Allis, Wisconsin. He was considered a happy child who lacked nothing until he was 6 years old, but his behavior changed abruptly after having to undergo surgery for his hernia. Nevertheless, the cause of it cannot be clearly identified, but several things took place in Dahmer's life at that time. The Dahmer family moved to Bath, Ohio, because his father, a chemist, had found a new job. His mother gave birth to his younger brother, named David. Jeffrey even chose the name himself. She often felt too weak to leave the bed, and she was hospitalized for chronic anxiety when Jeffrey turned 10. Dahmer withdrew more and more. He seemed to lack all self-confidence and seemed awkward with his classmates, which led to the fact that he had practically no friends during his childhood. The introverted child sought other hobbies, and he developed an increased interest in animals, but not the cute ones. He roamed the streets looking for dead wildlife that had been run over. If he found any, he took them to his secret hiding place, which was a patch of woods behind his parents' house. There, Jeffrey would cut them up to see how they looked from the inside. Dahmer later testified that he first had concrete fantasies of killing a person when he was only 14 years old. At the same age, he had his first experience with alcohol. Dahmer acquired a taste for it. In 1978, his senior year of high school, he got drunk so often that he was about to be expelled from school. Additionally, his parents divorced. The mother returned to Wisconsin, taking Dahmer's younger brother David with her, and the father temporarily moved into a motel. Jeffrey had the parental home to himself in summer of 1978. Not a happy development, as it turns out. June 1978. Jeffrey picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. They started drinking some alcohol, and deep down, Dahmer had been feeling lonely since his parents left, so he enjoyed the company. The two men got drunk and hung out together for a few hours. Then Hicks wanted to leave. He had enough. Jeffrey saw it differently. He longed for someone in his life who would be there for him all by himself. So he hit Stephen with a dumbbell and strangled him. Hicks couldn't leave him, Dahmer's interpretation of a satisfying relationship. And then Dahmer did what he had been only dreaming of before. He dismembered a human being. He wrapped the body parts in plastic bags and hid them under the house for 2 weeks. After that, he crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered the bone pieces through the forest. Meanwhile, Dahmer's alcohol consumption had gotten completely out of control. His drinking problem also cost him his university degree. He was expelled from Ohio State University after only 1 semester. His father, who had since remarried, urged his son to enlist in the army. Jeffrey Dahmer trained as a medic in San Antonio, Texas, and was then sent to an American base at Baumholder in the Westpfalz, where they discharged Dahmer after 2 years because of his continued alcohol abuse. So he returned to Ohio again. September 1987. 9 years after his first murder, Jeffrey Dahmer killed his second victim. Dahmer met Stephen at a gay bar. They took a hotel room and got heavily drunk. The next morning, Stephen was dead. Dahmer claimed he had no recollection of murdering him. He had no other plausible explanation. He must have killed Tom in a drunken stupor, he said. Jeffrey bought a big suitcase, and in it, he took the body to his grandmother's basement. There the corpse. After that, he dismembered the body and threw away the remains in the trash. In January and March, he killed 2 more men at his grandmother's house. She, on the other hand, didn't know about a single thing, but was annoyed that he and his friends would make a lot of noise. By the summer of 1988, she has had enough. She suggested that Jeffrey should move out. September 1988, Dahmer was finally living in his own apartment. He used his newfound freedom in his own way. He promised the 13-year-old Somsak money for a few nude photos and lured him into his apartment. The boy's parents noticed that he looked completely disturbed the days following this encounter. The parents reported Dahmer to the police, and the case ended up in court. The jury sentenced Jeffrey to 5 years in prison, of which he actually served only 10 months, and the rest was suspended. And even for the time of imprisonment, he was granted relief. Dahmer had asked the judge not to take away his job at the chocolate factory, because this, he said, was the only thing in his life of which he felt pride and which gave him stability. So Dahmer only had to spend the night in jail and was allowed to leave during the day. In March 1987, while the trial was still being heard, Jeffrey showed his true colors. He had found temporary shelter again at his grandmother's house. There he killed Anthony Sears, who dreamed of a career as a model. When Dahmer asked him to take a few photos of him, Sears was immediately on fire. The following 15 months, Jeffrey killed 12 people. By now he had developed a modus operandi to which he remained faithful in all his deeds. He approached his victims at well-known meeting places of the gay scene in Milwaukee. He lured some of them to his apartment with the prospect of quick money for a few nude photos. To the others, he promised some hardcore porn and a chilled six-pack waiting for them in his refrigerator. Once he had them in his apartment, Dahmer spiked the drinks with a drug to get them defenseless. That's when he strangled them. He dismembered the corpses, even took Polaroids of the various stages of the decay process. He usually kept the genitals and skulls of the victims as souvenirs, especially the heads. He had a strong sexual attraction to them. Through the trophies, he said, he remembered the murders and was able to relive the same sexual excitement he had felt at the time. As the number of victims increased, Jeffrey Dahmer also changed his method of disposing the body parts. In the beginning, he still disposed the remains in the trash. Later, he experimented with acid. In addition, Jeffrey consumed the flesh and blood of his victims. By his own admission, he did not like the blood, but he kept a supply of meat strips in his freezer, which he often prepared as a meal. Among the particularly tragic circumstances of the Jeffrey Dahmer case, that the killing spree could have ended sooner. 5 people would have been left alive if 2 police officers had relied less on prejudice and looked more closely. Another way to put it, Jeffrey Dahmer was extremely skilled at manipulating his environment. July 1991, Jeffrey was finally arrested. A victim escaped from him and his horrible acts. He was able to contact the police, convincing them to search his apartment. Pictures of decapitated corpses with their torsos slashed. Dahmer had hidden a dozen of skulls in the bedroom closet, not to forget jars standing around with male genitalia in them. In addition, countless other photos of horror. Dahmer had previously confessed to all his crimes during interrogations. In court, he pleaded guilty, but claimed to have been insane at the time of the crimes. He described them in full detail, and the defense hoped that this would convince the jury that only a madman had been capable of such horrific acts. It took the jury only 5 hours to agree on a verdict. The jury found Jeffrey Dahmer guilty and sane on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison on 15 counts. November 1994. Dahmer was in the prison's gymnasium with 2 other inmates. The 3 men were assigned to cleaning duty. One of the 2 fellow inmates was Jesse Anderson, a neo-Nazi, and was serving time for murder. The 3rd inmate was Christopher Scarver, also a convicted murderer. He was known to suffer from delusions. The guard led the 3 prisoners into the gym and then left them alone for 20 minutes. When the correctional officer returned, Jeffrey Dahmer was lying on the tilted floor with his skull crushed. Christopher Scarver had killed both fellow inmates with a dumbbell, which means that he had died by the same weapon he himself had used in his first murder. Jesse Anderson had fought back against his killer, and his body showed the typical defense wounds. But interestingly, none of these marks were found on Dahmer. First, let us run down some basic things. A lot of people don't know this, but you're not one sign. You're born in May, so you might be a Gemini or Taurus sun. But did you know that you have a Moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, and more signs? This is a birth chart. While every planet has a different meaning, the placement of the planet gives a lot more than just your moon is in Cancer, so you're sensible. No, it changes the energy completely. So if you have your moon, which symbolizes inner emotions, how you deal with things, the subconscious part of yourself that you might try to hide from others. In Cancer, people would assume that you're sensitive, deeply loyal, a natural nurturer, and love everything that deals with your family or home life. But what if the moon is in the 2nd house? That would mean that you prioritize your finances or belongings, that you're very clever and you have a need to support and protect others. A little unpredictable, but that's not all. In astrology, we look at the aspects of the moon too. So if your Cancer moon in the 2nd house has an aspect, let us say moon opposite to your Venus, it'll create some problem areas which you'll have to deal with. Your emotions could become so intense that they frighten other people. Another thing, looking at the ruler of your chart placements can help you out if you're trying to look for some clues for love, career-wise, past lives or karma. But explaining this would take a while, so I'll probably have to do another video on that. So, that would be modern astrology. Every placement has its own meaning and might affect the planets around. The houses are different areas of life, explaining what you've decided to do in this lifetime. This is a transit. You're able to see the current planets moving through your houses and touching your placements. That's how astrologers are able to see what you're going to face in the next weeks or months. But I'm not interested in the future. I want to see what has happened. Now, as I said in the beginning, I'm in the forensic part of astrology. I include medical astrology as well as the degree theory. The degree theory explains every degree in your chart. 1 degree is Aries, 2 degrees are Taurus, 3 degrees is Gemini, and so on. But I focus especially on bad or critical degrees, such as 18, 22, or 29, sometimes 0. They all have special meanings, but never good ones. Don't worry if you have them in your chart. They're just pointing to problematic situations or lessons, which might cost you a nerve or two. In medical astrology, every organ is sorted to a planet and sign. Here's an example. Virgo represents intestines, the alimentary canal, and the lower part of the liver. So, what if you have your Chiron, inner wounds, and in forensic astrology, sometimes open wounds, in Virgo and in the 3rd house? This could indicate that you might have a problem with digesting your food or anxiety. The 3rd house also symbolizes communication, learning, your surrounding, so you might get easily triggered by discussions and having to deal with diarrhea. Let's not forget the degree and the aspect to it, but I don't want you to fall asleep, so I'll cut it here. By now you're probably realizing that astrology is a lot more than just your sun sign. It's complicated, has a lot of details to it, and it takes a lot of time to see through. Alright, back to the Dahmer case. I'll analyze Jeffrey's natal chart, looking at what pops out, marking it as an important sign, which might have developed into critical and disgusting behavior. And just to point one thing out again, these patterns in his chart are never going to excuse the crimes and the pain he has committed. I'm just trying to understand what might have influenced his thinking, besides his childhood and his psychological medical stand. I hope that's clear. The next thing I'll be studying is his event chart. That's where I'll be able to use the degree theory and medical astrology. These are the only dates which are official and in public. Normally we could analyze the victim's chart as well, but I don't want to cross any boundaries of the families. So let's have a look at a serial killer's chart, shall we? This is Dahmer's natal chart. As you can see, his planets are all over the place, but here are some things which stand out. He has a stellium in his 8th house, which deals with death, endings, sometimes someone else's money or possessions, taboos, and sex. A stellium is when the house has 3 or more planets in it. In this case, you can see Mercury, Venus, and his Sun. His Venus is in 22 degrees, which is a destructive degree, meaning that you need to fix it before it breaks you. Venus, representing love, how you love, and what you need in love, turns in the 8th house to a very obsessive nature and is really, really, really intense, but also scary. In Taurus, this becomes a possessive structure, just holding on and never letting go of someone. Having his Sun in the 8th house will make him walk in the shadows, often an outsider, a loner, someone who's misunderstood. His Sun is in 0 degrees Gemini, so he gets the more negative aspected things in life because he needs to start new, especially when things come to an end. He needs to learn to let go. His dangerous and primal side, Lilith, is in his 9th house. So he wants to see, to learn, to embrace everything that's taboo. The 9th house stands for learning, higher education, religion, his own belief system. Lilith here indicates that he's used his own rules, rejected borders in every possible sense or way. Neptune in his 1st house creates a strong influence on his personality. He became a victim by his own self-deception, by his own illusions and confusions. This shows that he had no specific goal in his life, so he wasted his opportunities or time. Neptune rules drugs, everything that has to do with confusion, illusion, deceit, guilt, and addiction. His 1st house is representing his body, or his self, and as we know, he tried to escape into alcohol, becoming an alcoholic, an addict. Uranus in the 10th house, which rules career status and reputation, creates an instability regarding jobs. money and his confidence level. In Leo and in 17 degrees, he knew how to put on a mask, so superior beings actually believed him. Saturn, restriction, order, time and karma, is in his third house of communication, mental stability and his surroundings. This means that he had incredible low self-confidence and was probably depressed. This placement can indicate slow speech and he thought things through before saying it. Here's a clip.
And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons.
Let's look at the last thing that's standing out. His moon sign in his 7th house in 19 degrees in Aries. The 7th house, speaking about relationships, partners and sometimes marriage, is paired with his moon sign, Aries. So his inner emotions always had one simple thing in common: to dominate and to create emotional security, because that's what has been lacking. Aries is dominant, very straightforward, aggressive and full of temper. He can become extraordinarily dangerous when triggered, especially when talking about his feelings or having the feeling to get left behind. This is also something that he has mentioned in the interviews. He said, "I just wanted to have the person under my complete control, not having to consider their wishes, being able to keep them there as long as I wanted. Since the victims didn't want to be with him, he killed them, kept their skulls and sometimes consumed their organs." This was also considered part of his effort to keep his victims somehow alive through himself, even after he had murdered them. 19 degrees point to his first house in Libra, where we already talked about Neptune, the addiction. So making himself feeling at home with his victims and illusions is the way he decided to hop on his trauma. There is a lot more, but I wanted to make some bullet points to connect to with the next chapter, his event chart. I was originally going to analyze the night, morning when he killed 14-year-old Conorak, but the timestamps were not correct and you need the exact hour, at least, since the degrees change unbelievable fast. So we're going to have a look at the time when he was murdered by Christopher Scarver. We know that he beat Jeffrey up using a bar he had taken from the prison gym, and around 8:10 a.m. Dahmer was found on the bathroom floor with severe head injuries. He survived the initial beating, however maintained massive skull and facial fractures. He died an hour after he was taken to the hospital. This is how I can pinpoint the timing. Applying this to his transit chart, we get this event chart. When looking at charts like these, we mark the ascendant as the victim's point of view with the first house. In this case, that's Dahmer. The descendant is the killer's perspective, which would be Scarver. His ascendant is in Sagittarius, Jupiter in the 12th house with Pluto and his sun falling into the 2nd house. This describes Jeffrey facing life or death. Sun is life, Pluto is death, and the 12th house, which describes places like prison or mental hospitals. This couldn't be clearer. Mars, aggression, tension and action is in 25 degrees in his 8th house, which deals with death and endings. He struggled to stay alive. 25 degrees symbolize Aries, so the head, everything that has to do with the skull, face and eyes. Chiron, inner and outer wounds, is in Virgo, 9th house, falling into the 11th house and is in 24 degrees. This shows that he got killed and damaged by someone older, since Saturn is not only karma, but someone more mature. Saturn is in 6 degrees and directs back to Virgo. The 3rd house falls into the 5th house, which would symbolize a place where people have fun or are able to commit to their hobbies, meaning sports. The moon above his 12th house symbolizes his intuition at that time. He probably knew that he had this coming for him. Maybe this is also the reason why he didn't want to fight back. Now let's look at the killer's perspective. The descendant is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury, and in the 8th house. Again, death and endings. In 16 degrees, this leads us to his Cancer house. This also describes the killer. someone born in June, July, who had completely different point of views, especially on religion, since the ruler of Cancer is the moon, and the moon is in the 9th house. It's about the belief system. Scarborough was born on the 6th of July 1969. He's 9 years older than Jeffrey, so this fits. His origin would be from America, since Gemini represents it by a signature of location. Dahmer died apparently an hour later. By looking at the chart, I would confirm it. His ascendant is in 29 degrees, at a peak, and conjuncts his Jupiter in 27 degrees. So someone was with him, at least 2 other people who traveled to see him. I'm guessing his father. Pluto, in opposition to his sun, clarifies that he'd struggle with keeping himself conscious, passing out a lot of times before dying. He couldn't speak until he lost his battle. Out of a spiritual perspective, I think that he got his karma with part of fortune in 29 degrees Libra, but that's just my opinion. Here are my thoughts about this case. Seeing his stellium in the 8th house of death and resurrection made me gasp. Especially his Venus in a critical degree painted the picture for me and made me realize that he was absolutely in love with control, the dying part, as well as playing with people by forming them into whatever he wanted them to be. Dahmer was someone who couldn't handle his emotions and desire, so this made him into the Milwaukee cannibal. With all his emotional trauma, his mental state and his longings, do I think he could have been stopped? Yes and no. Yes, because the Milwaukee police should have looked sooner into his behavior, and no, since he had the compulsions and decided to not work against them. Sooner or later, Jeffrey would have killed, and astrologically speaking, he found beauty in it, which is terrifying. And nobody is automatically a killer, not even by astrology. Even his chart could have worked out as something deeply fulfilling and transforming, facing the darkness and stripping down his codependency. So, whoever tells you that killer have this as a life mission is wrong. This is your own choice. You choose to kill, not your birth chart. Thank you guys for listening and being here. This means a lot to me since this is my first YouTube video, so I hope you liked it and had some insights to forensic astrology. Have a great day and happy Halloween!